Hello, my name is Keanu Jones. Yate she Keanu Jones Inishia. Na Kirene Lishna, Totsoni Bashichin, Hachganzo Shichedo, Touchini Dashinella, Nile Dahilina Dent Nasha. So I just formally introduced myself in Navajo, but I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I've spent a lot of time, in like the filmmaking world, and also doing photography, some design work. I just kind of have, I've kind of played a lot in these different areas, and so I've kind of, over the years learned how to use and manipulate some of the tools within the Adobe programs. But primarily today, I'm going to be focusing on showing you the after, the result of the final image that I was able to create. Using images that I found from the Library of Congress, some images I took myself, and even instances in previous works where I've used just stock images to help, add layers and textures, and things of that sort. So I'll kind of walk you through my process. I usually started in Photoshop when I start about 1080 and 1920 canvas size, but you can choose in whichever canvas size you would like. And so there's two images that I'm kind of starting out with. And so I identified this image that I took on my phone of this bridge that you can see. I do like that bridge that runs straight across, that harsh line that runs across. I usually look for images that might have some clear lines and indication that gives a good idea of what I want to play with as an attempt. I also just look at the buildings and I like the structure of buildings because it's a little easier to be able to cut from them and create some depth. And so that's what I'm kind of starting out to do a little bit. And so it's kind of my first approach, but also I'm duplicating this first layer because I want to add some depth. I want the figure that I was thinking about and I selected, I want them to stand behind the light posts. And so that's kind of an idea that I already had in mind. But I just do enjoy being able to play with those layers and at least have that depth. I've also just want to point out, when I kind of in this place, in this space, kind of looking through these different materials and images, my primary subjects have always been just Native peoples, just like my identity as a Navajo, but also, just of a Native, person. It's seeing these images, of more of images of ancestral peoples and kind of seeing where we kind of came from is always really profound. But also I think what interests me in some of the thoughts and questions that I had while looking at these images is who the subject, what's their story, so when I kind of look through all these images and sometimes I'll kind of get some ideas or what is it kind of trying to invoke, but I've always just been really curious about what have they been thinking themselves as the subject, but also what is that story that's kind of connected to them, but also what kind of led up to those events, because I kind of feel like just learning and seeing these images, even for instance, I believe his name's Edward Curtis, if I'm not mistaken. But he's taken a lot of, historical images of Native peoples. And so it's kind of, part of, him being able to have access to cameras and capture these images. I guess, for me, it felt like my story wasn't being told or it wasn't being fully captured. I think there's some instances where it felt like, it was interesting, the narrative that they kind of tied to these images. And even, for example, if you look at on some of the images, the titles of them, for instance, I found an image that was titled "Vanishing People," and so I thought that was really interesting, seeing that, but also feeling that. And from this place of, I think this is where I kind of become more connected in the digital sense, is like, you know, I was able to almost feel like I was wanting to tell kind of my own story, or kind of pull from my inspiration and kind of bring this uniqueness to it, and kind of add these elements and layers. And so that's what I kind of really focused on. And overall, you know, the techniques and some of the compositions and the image, I look for harsh kind of lines. And so you'll see that in this image, I believe I took on my cell phone when I was on a trip. And so I think even just the intersection in these locations of these cities, it just felt like, it was almost like, you know, I felt absent, you know, my identity felt absent, but also it empowered me to, you know, what if I can teleport that, you know, what if I can bring that identity back into this contemporary world, and what does that kind of look like? And so the art images really kind of inspired and really kind of, you know, live in that theme of just kind of meshing those different past and the present and the future kind of themes to some of the images. And I think that's why I've really kind of emphasized, you know, cutting out images. And the image I selected, I was very mindful in making sure that the background wasn't super busy, because that's easier to translate and be able to select and kind of duplicate the image. Because sometimes if your background is super busy, you know, and that can just kind of cause some other some challenges at times, but it doesn't mean that it's not usable. It just necessarily just means that we'll just have to spend a little bit more time being able to trace it out and get the edges where we need them to go. Then also, you know, as far as lines and geometric shapes, I do like the line that cuts across the frame, but I kind of see that it's a lot of emphasis and heavy kind of towards the bottom. But I want to kind of, you know, add some other balance, like, so one way I've kind of added balance to some compositions, and also, you know, just a technique that I feel like represents almost like a portal. These circular motions and geometric shapes, primarily that are just squares and circles, that I've kind of incorporated throughout a lot of my work. And so, you know, when I've showed others that, you know, I kind of felt like there was this kind of motif, or kind of this theme of teleportation, like there was this opening within the image itself. And so I've always kind of liked that feature, or that kind of, that little, you know, kind of it adds to just the depth of the image. And I'll kind of tone down some of the colors and desaturate them. And these are just kind of isolated by layers, and where I kind of match them and play with them. And another big emphasis that I've kind of found, or another technique that I've always played with, is just the blending modes. The blending modes have been really helpful in being able to just really see how this layer blends, you know, whether it's the color or adding a texture on top. You know, I want a folded crease on this image or this layer. And so when you kind of do that, I've noticed that it really provides this depth of almost like this figure. You know, there's a single layer in the back that might be like paper-like, you know, one in the front that might have like a burn type of mark, and the other one up maybe in the front might have this kind of gloss, kind of painted over type of texture. And so sometimes I really like those textures, and something I kind of lean towards. And noise is a part of that too. You know, I generally, you know, as an artist, like those textures and images and feelings, and just kind of tie it into the different layers. It makes me kind of almost feel like what these different layers are. And sometimes it might get lost in the blend of them, and that's okay. but also I've kind of played with this technique where I've taken my subject and I've duplicated him maybe 2 or 3 times, and I add a gradient map on top of it, and that's just allowed me to give that figure different colors, and I kind of like this rainbow type of effect it kind of has, or almost like a 3D type of effect. And that was just something I've played with really early on. And sometimes when I'm kind of creating and playing with the composition, I'll kind of just toss these things in there just to add these little extra layers, and kind of really add another dynamic to it. Yeah, at the end of this, I just want to make something that looks good, but also it feels kind of balanced. I also just want to say thank you to the Strata Gallery for their Emerging Artist Fellowship. This has been super helpful and grateful for me as an artist to really kind of explore this other area outside of filmmaking, but also just kind of exploring other avenues as an artist. So I just want to say thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this. Burn type of mark, and the other one up at maybe in the front might have this kind of gloss, kind of painted over type of texture. And so sometimes I